I walked into court with two things, a folder and an obituary. "Your Honor," I said, sliding the clipping across, "this is the notary who supposedly watched me sign away my lakehouse." The judge read the dates. The room stopped breathing, my daughter stopped smiling. The witness had been dead 6 months. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. My name is Thomas Hale. I am 68 years old, a grandfather twice over, a retired high school shop teacher with a rebuilt right knee and a garage that still smells like pine shavings. I have lived long enough to bury my parents and my wife. I have lived long enough to learn that grief is a slow leak that empties you by degrees and that betrayal is a knife that does its work in one clean motion. I also learned, late, but not too late, that if you ever doubt whether someone thinks you are still dangerous, put on a suit and bring the truth into a room where lies prefer to hold court. I did not always know how to do any of that. 2 years after my wife, Marie, died, I was still working out how to heat half a pot of coffee instead of a full one and how to set only one plate at the table. My daughter, Angela, visited on Sundays with her husband, Nolan, and their 2 kids, Max and Lucy. Most weeks I was just happy to hear the chatter and bump of small feet. To hear anything that was not the old house settling or the refrigerator coughing itself awake at 2 in the morning. If you had asked me then whether I trusted Angela, I would have answered yes without even setting down my mug. Angela was the one who stayed with Marie during those long clinic days. She was the one who braided Lucy's hair the way Marie used to braid hers. She was the one who told me she would always look after me, and I believed that because it sounded like something Marie would have said if she could have gone on living. It began, as these things do, with paper. A letter from the bank that did not look like the letters I normally received. The logo was the same, but the tone was off. "Your account has been updated," it said. "We are pleased to welcome your agent." I did not have an agent. I did not even have a gardener who came on schedule. I had a neighbor's boy who mowed when the grass got bossy, and I paid him cash, because no one but a fool pays by check for a job that can be done in an afternoon. Agent, I repeated aloud, because sometimes hearing the word is different from reading it. I set the letter down and went to the garage. In the back of a drawer, under a stack of sandpaper discs, I keep a cigar box. It contains my passport, a roll of the ancient blue thread Marie used for buttons, and the keys to the lakehouse. The box was where it always was. The passport, thread, and keys were where they always were. My hands stopped shaking. I called the bank and asked to speak with a human being. It took 3 humans to find one who understood that I am not a man who has agents. Her name was Rosie, and her voice sounded like someone who buys birthday cards for her coworkers without making a fuss about it. She listened while I told her that the letter was news to me, and then she put me on hold to consult a supervisor. When she came back, she used the same careful voice I used to use when I had to tell a student that he had cut the board too short to fix with glue. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I am looking at a durable power of attorney filed last week. It appoints your son-in-law, Mr. Nolan Reeves, as your agent to manage financial affairs." I said, "No, it does not." "It's signed by you," she said gently. "Notarized, too." There are moments in a man's life when he hears a door click shut behind him and realizes he has stepped into a new room without meaning to. I asked Rosie to fax me a copy, and when the thin paper came curling out of my machine, I smoothed it with both palms and read it twice. The signature at the bottom looked like my name had been cast in gelatin and then run through a washing machine. It leaned left instead of right. The crossbar of the T sat too high. My fountain pen leaves a dark entry stroke where I begin the H. This mark had a strange hollow there, as if someone had lifted the pen to check his work. I carry an old scar on my right hand from the Navy, a seam of pale skin that makes my H slant in a way that no handwriting workbook would ever recommend. That scar taught me to build with jigs and to sign with a piston filler pen filled with blue-black ink that oxidizes from navy to iron as the days pass. The ink on the page was black like a funeral suit. It had that oily sheen you get from a novelty pen on a chain in a post office lobby. Notarized, Rosie had said. The stamp read, Jane L. Porter, Notary Public, Commission number 093811, expires 2027. The signature below it said Jane L. Porter as well. I had no idea who she was. I called Angela. Dad? Her voice was bright enough for a commercial. Everything okay? I got a letter from the bank, I said. It says Nolan has some kind of power of attorney for my accounts. She went silent long enough for me to hear a cartoon on in the background. Oh, she said finally. Nolan mentioned that. It is just in case something happens. You know, proactive. He is very organized. Angela, I said, I did not sign that. I could hear the wheels lining up in her head. It is a sound I know because I am the man who taught her to ride a bike. I remember the clack and whir. Dad, you have been forgetful. Remember when you called me from the grocery store because you forgot why you were there? I called because the list rolled under the seat, I said. And because I wanted to hear your voice. Dad, she said, soft now, careful, Nolan works with documents all day. He knows what he is doing. He said you were tired when you signed, that you did not want to go somewhere twice. What did he say I signed? A power of attorney, she said, quicker now, rushing the river. And a quitclaim deed. It is all standard. Quitclaim. The word landed like grit in my teeth. For the lakehouse, she said. Do not be upset. Nolan says. I hung up. It was not polite. It was, however, necessary. The lakehouse is not large. It is not even particularly nice to anyone who measures life in granite counters. It is a low-slung cedar thing that looks like a boyhood drawn by a man. It is the place where my children learned to swim and where Max took his first steps on a deck that still has a dent in it from his fall. It is where I fell in love with Marie again each June when the lilacs were louder than the birds. I would sooner have quit my name than quit that claim. I drove there immediately. The gravel popped beneath my tires. The door opened under my key as it always had. The air inside smelled like old boards and last summer. A folded sheet of paper sat on the counter. Nolan's handwriting, wide letters, the way a person writes when he expects the world to lean in, said, "We will take it from here, Tom. It is better if you do not come around for a while." I stood very still and tried to keep my temper from spilling out of me and staining the boards. A power of attorney opens a door. A quitclaim deed changes the house itself. Documents are not paper, they are levers. Once a man understands that, he stops assuming he will be asked politely to move. The county recorder's office sits in a building that smells like toner. The woman at the window had a jar of peppermint sticks and a patience I envied. I told her my name and asked whether anything had been recorded against my property. She did not blink when she read the screen. She printed out 2 documents. They were copies of the ones Rosie had sent, but with the official stamp, recorded, mashed into the corner like a bruise. That stamp, she said, tapping the seal on the power of attorney, that notary is new. I have not seen that name much. Do you know if that is a person? I asked. I mean alive, licensed. She smiled. They have to be licensed to file here. She paused, then lowered her voice. But I had a notary last year who kept working a month after her commission expired. We caught it. The recorder pulled a notice. Mistakes happen. Mistakes, I thought, do not usually attach themselves to my life like this. What do I do? I asked, and she must have heard something in the way I said it, because she took off her glasses and leaned forward. Get a lawyer, she said simply. And a forensic document examiner. If that signature is not yours, do not play around. And if they have a power of attorney, you need to shut down every avenue they could use to hurt you. I took one peppermint stick on my way out and did not unwrap it until I reached my truck. I do not usually pray in parking lots, but I did then. There are two kinds of lawyers you need when your own blood has put a hook through your name, one who can talk to a judge without flinching and one who knows what to do with a pen mark that looks wrong to an old man's eye. I found both in the same place, because Providence cares about details. A teacher I used to work with, Miriam Diaz, had a brother who handled probate and property disputes. His name was Raphael, and he had the stillness I admire in men who can resist the urge to fill silence with their own importance. He listened to everything. He grunted once when I told him about the notary. He grunted again when I pulled an old file from my bag and set it on his desk. What is that? He asked. Every document Marie and I ever signed, I said. Originals when I could keep them. Copies when I could not. I kept them all because I do not throw away the past unless I must. He looked at me with something I had not seen in a lawyer's eyes before, respect. Raphael sent the documents to a forensic examiner named Dale, a wiry woman whose glasses were always crooked and whose fingers moved like the tips of a pianist's when she held a magnifier. She took one look at the power of attorney and laughed. They did not even try, she said. What did your son-in-law do before he decided he was a paper wizard? He sells insurance, I said. That explains the confidence, she replied. She showed me what I already knew, the pen lifts, the tremor where no tremor belongs, the way the ink pooled as if a hand stopped and restarted its courage. Then she showed me what I did not, the dot matrix pattern beneath the signature. This is not a wet signature, she said, tapping a spot with a thin metal pointer. It is printed. Someone scanned your signature from an older document and dropped it into this one. See the halftone dots? If you run your finger across it, it is flat. I stared. Why does that matter? It looks like me. It is like a photograph of you, she said. But a photograph is not the same as the man. On a real signature, the ink rides the paper and sometimes bites it. Here it is just lying on top like dye. We can test the ink on the notary stamp, too. And that stamp is unusual. How so? She angled the paper under a lamp. Notary stamps are like fingerprints. Little differences in spacing, in the wear on the die. This one looks fresh and clean and wrong. I would like to see another document from this notary if we can find one. Raphael filed for an emergency injunction to freeze any transfers, sales, or loans against the lakehouse, and for a temporary restraining order against the use of the power of attorney. He filed a quiet title action, too, because certain words are keys in court, and quiet title is one of them, the kind that silences the noise of false claims until the judge decides who, if anyone, may speak. Be ready for ugliness, Raphael said as we stood in the hallway waiting for a clerk to stamp something that men like Nolan believe is beneath them. This is family. It always gets worse before it gets better. It got worse the way a storm does when it realizes the house you are sheltering in has a hole in the roof. Nolan served me with a petition to appoint him as my guardian due to incapacity. He attached notes from a doctor I had never met and a list of incidents that apparently proved I could not be trusted to make my own choices: burned coffee, a lost set of keys, a call to my granddaughter's school secretary to ask whether they still cut the crusts off sandwiches. You baked bread twice in 1 week, the petition read. Neighbors expressed concern. The neighbors had expressed concern because I make bread like a man who has been cured of silence. I let the dough rise twice because Marie always liked the crumbs softer that way. I shared loaves with anyone who waved at me from a yard. Nolan also attached a letter from Angela, my Angela, in which she wrote that I had become suspicious and paranoid, and that I had forgotten important conversations we had in April concerning planning. The letter was dated the day after I hung up on her. I did not sleep that night. What I did instead was sit in my old recliner and think about all the times in the last year that Angela's eyes had slid past mine toward Nolan when I asked a simple question like, "How are the kids?" I thought about how he answered instead. I thought about how Angela had always used to fill every empty space with stories until he learned to speak for her. And I thought about Max and Lucy, who should never have to choose between loving their mother and visiting their grandfather. I decided then that I would not yell. I would not slam my hand on a table or curse a man who does not deserve the dignity of my anger. I would do what paper does, I would move levers. We sought a hearing on the guardianship petition. Arizona, where I live, knows that old people are sometimes tricked by their own babies. The judge assigned to our case was the kind of woman who reads every page and waits before she smirks. She asked me 3 questions: where I lived, what day it was, and who the president was. Then she asked me what a lathe does, because she had read my file and was not afraid to use the details she found there. It shapes a thing by spinning it, I said. Turns raw stock into something that knows what it is. But a lathe does not care whether you are skilled. It will punish a sloppy hand. It will rip the work out of your grip. She nodded, and then she nodded again when Raphael submitted Dale's preliminary report on the forgeries. He asked the court to order the bank statements, the notary's commissioning documents, and any communications between Nolan and Angela related to my accounts. The bank fought us. They did not want to admit how quickly they had accepted a stranger as my voice in the world. The notary office responded with a stack of PDFs that smelled like apology. Jane L. Porter, Notary Public, Commission Number 093811. The signature on her application matched the signature on my documents. The problem was not the signature. It was the date. Her application had been filed 2 years earlier. Under it, in neat ink, a clerk had written, "Deceased. Commission terminated." The date of death was 6 months before the power of attorney had been notarized in my name. Raphael let the silence sit for a minute in the courtroom before he spoke. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "the dead do not swear to a man's signature." Nolan looked at his lawyer. His lawyer kept his face neutral, as he had been trained. Angela pressed a tissue to her eyes and did not look at me. We left that hearing with a temporary order, the power of attorney suspended, the quitclaim deed clouded by our suit, the lakehouse locked in place by the court's hand. I drove home and sat in the driveway for a long minute. I wanted to call Angela and tell her about Max's last baseball game I had attended, how he had slid into second and come up dirt wet, and how I had held my breath the whole time like a fool. I wanted to call Lucy and ask about the book we were reading together, the one with the dragon whose scales changed color when someone told the truth. Instead, I walked into my kitchen, took down Marie's recipe box, and made soup. I am not ashamed to admit that I cried into the broth and that the salt probably improved the flavor. Dale did not stop with the notary. She pulled every document from the recorder and the bank and the brokerage accounts. She photographed my original signatures from the past 30 years. She built an atlas of my hand. Then she took Nolan's petition, with its attachments, and built a history of theirs. She found two more extraordinary things. The first was a blunder. On the quitclaim deed, beneath the forged signature, the date had been typed by someone who was impatient with numbers. Month and day were flipped the way someone does when he grew up writing dates in an order the county recorder's software does not like. The date format matched Nolan's emails. The underlying PDF metadata showed the author as a Winslow, which turned out to be the name of an assistant in Nolan's office. Dale smiled when she found that one. "Arrogance leaves fingerprints," she said. The second was more complicated. On the power of attorney, just below my name in small, faint gray letters, was an artifact of the scan. It was the bottom of a word, re. When Dale enhanced the contrast, the whole ghost of the text emerged, "For the love of Marie." It hit me like a hand to the chest. Marie and I used to write that at the bottom of big decisions we made together because we were fools for sentiment, and because a marriage trains you to pick a North Star and keep walking toward it even when your feet ache. The power of attorney Nolan had filed had been made by cutting my signature from another document. He had not even realized that he captured a piece of the words below. Dale pulled the original. It was a letter I wrote to our children after Marie's diagnosis, outlining how we wanted certain medical wishes honored. The letter had never left our house. Angela had helped me put it in the safe the week before the hospice bed came. I started shaking when I realized what that meant. Raphael put a hand on my shoulder. "We will find out how he got it," he said. "But we already know enough." Nolan's lawyer asked for a settlement meeting before our next hearing, a sign that he was either afraid or calculating. We went to their firm's conference room, which did its best to look like a minimalist museum, a long table, exposed brick, a view of nothing important made to look like it mattered. Angela sat beside Nolan, her fingers worrying the edge of a tissue until it began to snow lint. She stared at her lap. Nolan looked at me like a man looks at a fire he thinks he can jump. "We can avoid all this ugliness," Nolan began, a gentleness in his voice that always struck me as practiced. "Dad, Tom, no one wants to see you dragged through court. You are tired. This is a lot. The financial planning we did can stand if we all just breathe and stop being dramatic." I did not look at him. I looked at my daughter. "Angela," I said softly, "did you go through my safe?" She flinched as if I had tossed the word at her like a stone. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Nolan and then at her lap again. I was looking for insurance paperwork," she said finally. Nolan said. "Angela," I said. "Did you take any documents out of the house?" She bit her lip the way she used to when she was 6 and had eaten a cookie before dinner. "I made a copy of the letter," she whispered. "Nolan said we needed an example of your signature for the bank, because sometimes they mess up verification. Did you watch him put my name on a power of attorney?" Raphael asked, gently but without apology. She shook her head quickly, then slower. "He said it would be easier for everyone if we just set things up. He said you would fight if we asked. He said I have children to protect. He said you would understand." "I understand," I said, not raising my voice, because truth does not need volume. "You are my child, and you are scared of the future, and you trusted the wrong person to guide you in it." Nolan's jaw tightened. This moralizing is not productive. We can undo the quitclaim deed, leave the power of attorney in place, narrowly drafted, and agree not to press charges. He glanced at his lawyer. Everyone keeps their dignity. Raphael chuckled in a way that managed to be kind and lethal at once. Dignity, he said, has already left the room. But my client is a practical man. Here is what will happen. You will sign a stipulated judgment voiding all documents you filed. You will pay Mr. Hale's fees. You will record a statement acknowledging the fraud and ask the court to enter an injunction against you and any entity acting on your behalf. And you will agree that any further interference will trigger a liquidated damages clause in an amount we will set so high you will be able to feel it in your sleep. Nolan laughed. It sounded wrong in that room. You cannot prove a crime, he said. This is a family misunderstanding. Dale slid a folder across the table. Two more things, she said to Nolan's lawyer in the tone of a woman who has rearranged her schedule to show up and will not be asked to do it twice. Your assistant left his name in the metadata. And your notary died before she witnessed anything. I plan to enjoy explaining both of those facts to a jury. Nolan's face did something I hope my grandchildren never see on a man they trust. Angela started to cry in earnest, shoulders shaking, tissue shredded in her hands. Raphael turned to me. We can keep negotiating, he said in a voice only I could hear. Or we can put this in front of the judge and let the facts march. Let them march, I said, not because I wanted to humiliate my daughter, but because some lessons must be taught in the language of consequence or they are not learned at all. The hearing where I handed the judge the obituary did not take long. Judges have a smell for rot. Ours needed only a whiff. She vacated the power of attorney, voided the deed, and set a separate date to consider sanctions. She referred the matter to the county attorney for review. It should have felt like victory then, but it did not. Victory is a strange word when you are standing beside a woman you would have thrown yourself in front of a train for when she was 3 and could not sleep. Dad, Angela said in the hallway afterward, voice as thin as paper, I thought I was protecting you. Angela, I said, and I used her full name because she needed to hear it, you were protecting Nolan. And you were protecting a story he told you about me, a story where I am a problem to be solved. I taught you to use tools. You used mine against me. She crumpled around the words, and I put my hand on her shoulder because I am her father and because love is not a faucet I turn on and off depending on my day. I will not let him use you to hurt me, I added. But I will not throw you away. I went home and sat at the table Marie had sanded while she was pregnant with Angela. I took out a legal pad and wrote the words I had avoided writing for months, new trust. I called Raphael and asked him to meet me the next day. I told him what I wanted. I want Max and Lucy provided for in a way that Nolan cannot touch, I said. I want a spendthrift clause, and I want the trustee to be someone who cannot be manipulated. I want an interim clause, contest and you are out. And I want a provision that any beneficiary convicted of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult forfeits his or her share. Raphael nodded, wrote, asked questions, and wrote some more. What about Angela? He asked finally, soft. I looked at Marie's chair. If she is willing to testify honestly about what happened, I said, I will consider a small lifetime stipend outside the trust, discretionary, conditioned on counseling and on having no financial tie to Nolan. If she cannot do that, then she is welcome at my table but not in my ledger. The week that followed taught me that paper can also protect. We recorded a notice of our suit against the Lakehouse title so that anyone trying to touch it would prick his finger and bleed a little first. We sent letters to the bank, the brokerage, the post office, the credit card companies, the county recorder, and my own doctor, instructing them to add authentication procedures to anything to do with my name. We froze my credit. We built a wall. Nolan tried one more time to jump it. He listed the lakehouse for sale through his friend's agency, perhaps believing the injunction was just ink on paper. The first showing was scheduled for a Saturday morning. I drove to the property and stood on the deck with my back to the lake and my face to the door. When the buyer's car pulled in, I lifted a hand and smiled the way a man smiles when he is about to ask a stranger to do him a kindness. "Morning," I said. "Before you go in, you should know that you cannot buy this house today. It is not for sale. The man trying to sell it does not own it. He owns a mess he made instead." The couple blinked at me. The agent, Nolan's friend, opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "My lawyer will be here in 3 minutes, I added. "So will the sheriff's deputy. The judge's injunction will be here in my folder in 20 seconds if you would like to see it. But you can also save yourself the trouble and go have pancakes at the diner down the road, which are excellent. Tell Linda at the counter that Tom sent you." The buyers looked at each other, then at the agent, then at me. I held the smile and the folder. They chose pancakes. Raphael arrived. The deputy arrived. Nolan, late and red around the ears, arrived with Angela in tow. The deputy served him with a warning and with Raphael's papers. Angela stood beside her husband and looked at me the way I imagine a ship looks at a lighthouse when the captain insists the rocks are somewhere else. "Dad," she said in a little voice, but Nolan put a hand on her arm and said, "Let us go, Angela," as if my child were a leash and not a person. They left. The wind off the lake smelled like a clean slate. I would like to tell you that everything after that went like a trumpet chorus. The truth is, court is slow because it is heavy, and heavy things do not move quickly without breaking. The county attorney filed charges against Nolan for forgery, fraud, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. They offered him a plea deal if he cooperated and repaid my legal fees. He refused. He did not imagine that a jury would look at him and see a man who had learned to use kindness as camouflage. Angela moved back into her old bedroom for 3 days one week in August while she tried to decide whether to testify. We ate quietly. We watched Lucy's favorite show and did not talk about the way the dragon scales changed color when someone told the truth. On the 3rd day she sat across from me with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she never drank and said, "I am so ashamed, Dad." I took the letter because I thought Nolan would protect me if anything happened to you. I thought I was being a good mother. "You were a good mother," I said. "You made a terrible choice. That is not the same as being a terrible person." "Will you ever forgive me?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "I already did. But forgiveness is not a time machine." She testified. She admitted what she had done, and she told the truth about Nolan's pressure. The county attorney did not charge her. Not because she had not done wrong, but because there is a difference between a hand that holds a tool and a hand that bends a hand to pick it up. The judge sentenced Nolan to probation and community service, ordered restitution, and entered a civil judgment for our fees. He lost his professional licenses and found, perhaps for the first time, that people do not always admire a man who smiles while he sells them things. The lake house stayed mine. The bank apologized in writing, which is a rare form of music. The trust was set. The spendthrift provisions were ironclad. The in terrorem clause sat there on page 26 like a quiet dog that would bite if provoked. Max came over one afternoon with his mitt. We tossed a ball until the sun was low. He is 12 now and already taller than I was at 14. He caught the ball and held it a second instead of throwing it back. Grandpa, he said, Mom told me what happened. I am sorry. Thank you, I said. Are you okay? He shrugged, blinking like he did not want to cry. I do not like when people yell. Me neither, I said. That is why we used paper instead. He smiled then, a little, and threw the ball again, and I thought about how the world is not kind, but it is sometimes fair if you are willing to fight with your whole self and not just your loud voice. Lucy drew me a picture of the lake house. The dragon from her book sat on the roof. Its scales were turquoise, which means something if you have read the story. On the back she wrote, in that large, deliberate hand children use when they want you to notice their effort, Truth House. Angela asked me to meet her at the cemetery where Marie is buried. We stood there watching the leaves flip silver in the wind. I keep waiting for Mom to tell me what to do, she said finally. She did, I said. She told you for 34 years. She told you with every meal and every bedtime and every time she made you apologize and then told you she loved you anyway. Angela nodded. I do not know how to make this up to you, she said. You cannot, I said. You can only be different now. She took a breath like she had been underwater. I left, she said. Nolan. I told him I would not live with a liar. He said he would ruin me. I said I have already been ruined and that I am trying to be built again. Good, I said, and then we stood there a long while, which is sometimes what rebuilding looks like. If this were a story written to sell shampoo, it would end with a reconciling dinner and a speech that makes everyone clap. The truth is quieter and more satisfying. I updated my will. I went to the lake house and fixed the loose board on the deck. I made bread and shared it with the neighbors, who looked at me differently, not because I had become more interesting, but because I had reminded them, and myself, that an old man is not a soft target, he is a fortress that remembers where he put his stones. I planted a row of lilacs along the fence line. I signed the paperwork for the trust with my fountain pen, watching the blue-black ink turn iron as it met the air. I added 3 words in the margin of the first page, not because they have any legal force, but because the law is not the only tool I own. For the love of Marie. When the clerk recorded the final judgment quieting title in my favor, Raphael sent me a copy with a note that said simply, "It is finished." But we both know that some endings are also beginnings. Angela got a job at the elementary school library. She takes classes on Tuesdays. She keeps a jar of peppermint sticks on her desk. Nolan moved to another city and sells things that do not have to be notarized. Max made the varsity team as a freshman. Lucy reads out loud to me on the porch because she likes how my face changes when the dragon tells the truth. Sometimes, when the water is very still, I can hear Marie in the sound the lake makes against the old boards. She always liked that sound. It is a steady sound, patient. It says, if you build a thing right, it lasts. It says, if you set the foundation true, the whole house will stand in a storm. The day the restitution check arrived, I did not cash it. I put it in a frame and hung it in the garage above my lathe, a reminder that even men who think they can forge your name cannot forge your backbone. Then I took my pen and wrote another letter, this one to Max and Lucy. I told them the story you have just read, without the parts that would turn their mother into a villain. I told them that paper can be used to bind or to free and that they should insist on being the kind of people who use it for the latter. The last line I wrote was advice I wish someone had handed me when I was younger and less carved by weather. When a man asks you to close your eyes and trust him, open your eyes and read every line of the document instead. The next week, I went back to court for a hearing on sanctions. Nolan's lawyer wanted mercy. The judge wanted to talk. She leaned forward and spoke so softly that everyone had to lean in to hear. This court sees hundreds of families a year, she said. Some survive the pressure and some crack. What keeps a family from shattering is not the absence of storms. It is the presence of men and women who refuse to be erased. I do not know if that is how judges usually talk. I know only that it is how this one did on that day. On my way out of the courthouse, I put my hand on the rail and felt the grain of the wood. It had worn smooth where thousands of palms had passed. I thought about the boys and girls I taught to respect their tools. I thought about Angela's little hand inside mine at the county fair when she was 5. I thought about the dragon changing color when the truth arrived. At the bottom of the steps, Max and Lucy were waiting with Angela beside them. No one said much. We did not need to. We went to the diner and ate pancakes, because they are excellent, and because life is not only paper and courtrooms and sad lessons. It is also sweet things and syrup and the way a grandchild laughs when a blueberry rolls off his plate and he catches it with a finger like it is a marble you might lose if you blink. People think that document forgery is just ink and nerve. They think a lie written neatly becomes true. It does not. It becomes a note in a song that does not belong there. And if you put the right ears in the room, if you insist on it, you can make the orchestra stop and tune again. The last thing I did, after the court's order became final and the trust was recorded and the lakehouse stood untroubled by any name but mine, was to take a small hammer and a brass plate I had stamped in the garage. I screwed it into the deck rail by hand. The plate reads, Truth House. I used short screws so I can remove it when Max and Lucy inherit the place 50 years from now and decide they do not want their grandfather's sentiment staring at their friends during summer barbecues. It glints in the sun in a way that makes you notice it only when you are close. That seems right. Truth is not a billboard. It is a plate near the handrail you grip when you are stepping onto a deck that has held you all your life and will hold those you love when you are gone. They tried to write me out. They did not count on me knowing how to read. They did not count on my pen. They certainly did not count on the quiet power of a dead notary's obituary and a judge with a good nose. They forgot what Marie never did, that a man who signs his name with care will fight like hell to keep it from being used against him.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.